There's something about IKEA that I just find phenomenal. And listen, I love IKEA. You gotta know that. And an afternoon spent walking through the showcase rooms, getting a cheap lunch, walking out with a fake plant for your bookshelf, in my opinion, that is an afternoon well spent. But here's the thing that I love the most, and it's kind of ironic, but when it comes to their furniture, I love the instructions that they include in the box because they are absolutely terrible. Seriously, they are completely and totally indecipherable. If you're trying to assemble something more complicated than a bookshelf, then you might as well ignore what the instructions are telling you because they leave out steps, the pictures make no sense, nothing is labeled. You might as well be trying to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics, seriously. And I love it ironically, but here's why I love them. When it comes to IKEA instructions, there's a lot that's left up to interpretation. And that's exactly how life works. It's true, life does not come with exact instructions. There's no list of step A, step B, step C, and then you'll find a fulfilling life. And because there's no exact steps that we're given to follow, that's why we need trust. Specifically, trust in God. There's a quote that I've heard before that I genuinely live by, that God rarely gives clarity, but he always gives faith. It's true, God doesn't tell us exactly what we're supposed to do, but he does give us faith to trust him as we make one decision at a time. And we don't like that because we want to be in control. We want to know what we're supposed to do so that it feels like we're controlling the outcome. This is the lesson that Nebuchadnezzar needed to learn in Daniel chapter 4, the lesson of humility. He needed to see through his dream and through his brief stint of behaving like an animal. He needed to see through all of that God was in control of the world. And he, Nebuchadnezzar, wasn't. The Bible says this in Daniel chapter 4, verse 34. It says, "At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored." Thank goodness for that. "And then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, 'What have you done?'" I'm going to reveal something. When I read those words, I squirm a little bit. God does what he pleases? The Aramaic word for pleases is tsatzava, which means according to his inclination. So if God has an inclination to be mean to me, then he just can? And what's worse, according to what Nebuchadnezzar says, if God just decides to be on a Monday mean to me, then nobody can hold back his hand. A better way of translating the Aramaic there is no one can knock God's hand away. Nobody can stop him or call him into question. And that might make many of us uncomfortable. We reason to ourselves, hey, I should be able to call God into question because everything in my life hasn't gone the way I've wanted it to. And I get that sentiment. I really do. I've had a number of mentors in my life, and they all share one thing in common. At one point during their mentorship of me, I ignored their advice because I believed I knew more than they did. That's been true of all of them. And this is part of being human. We all think that we know better. And the same is true of God. We question him. We think we know better. In fact, if you read through the Psalms, you'll see example after example of God followers who question his will. Here's the words of David, King David, from Psalm chapter 13. He says this, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall." This is an inevitable part of the Christian life, that at some point we will question God. We will think that we know better, especially when we're going through grief or through periods of doubt. But But the Christian life is about growing closer to God, and that means learning to trust Him more and more. The Christian life is about leaning closer to God during times of difficulty instead of distancing ourselves from Him. It's about learning to say the same thing David said in the middle of his questioning. He says this in Psalm chapter 13, verse 5. After all of his doubt, after all of his frustration, David says, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, for He has been good to me." If we want to grow, we need to understand that the reason we can trust God is that He is completely and wholly different from us. He isn't a character in creation. He stands outside of creation, and He is present through all of it. He is omnipresent. He doesn't change His mind from one day to the next. His will is constant, it's consistent and everlasting, and ultimately pointed toward the good. In Romans chapter 8, verse 28, it says this, it says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." The Christian life then is seeing how God constantly and continually works all things for good. And as we see God move, we learn to trust God more and more. I mean, we rely on Him more and more. We seek His wisdom and His peace to work through the difficulty of our lives. And so this is the lesson that Nebuchadnezzar had to learn. Humility is about trust. In fact, humility is radical trust in God. It's when we say, as we're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, that we will fear no evil. Why? Because God is with us. He will protect us. The pastor Rod Cooper tells the story of watching a father play with his little boy, repeatedly throwing him up in the air and catching him just before he hit the ground. And the child was relaxed, he was laughing, and he was saying, "Do it again, do it again." And the pastor thought, if that was me, I'd be stiff as a board, man. And so he walked up to the father and he asked him, "Can you explain to me why your son is so relaxed, even when he's out of control?" And the father said, "It's very simple. We have a history together. We've played this game before, and I've never dropped him." Listen, God doesn't drop us. I mean, that's why we look up to Him. So here's my question to you. How can you look up to God a little more in order to trust Him in your life?